Jeremy Loffredo, a reporter for the Gray Zone, did some of the best reporting from inside Israel and the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, on what is happening in Israel since the attacks by Hamas and other resistance groups on October 7th, 2023. His reporting saw him detained in Israel on October 8th, 2024, at a checkpoint in the West Bank. The allegations against him stemmed from a report, apparently, about exposing the locations of strikes launched at missile targets inside Israel by Iran, although other media outlets did the same thing. He was blindfolded, shackled, thrown in a military truck, placed in solitary confinement for 3 days with little food or water, and eventually unofficially deported. His detention and deportation highlight the cases of Palestinian journalists, over 130 of whom have been killed in Gaza, many after being targeted by Israel. Israel has also arrested dozens of Palestinian journalists since October 7th. At least 43 Palestinian journalists remain imprisoned by Israel, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. Many are held under Israel's administrative detention law, which allows for indefinite detention without charge or trial. Even a detainee's location is often unknown. Human rights organizations have reported evidence of Palestinian journalists being tortured in Israeli prisons. Today we are going to look at several of Loffredo's reports for the Gray Zone, examine the heavy censorship in Israel, the suppression of all speech that raises concerns about the genocide in Gaza by Palestinians and Israelis, the heavy-handed repression against Palestinians that has been turbocharged since October 7th, in the West Bank, and how this internal repression is reconfiguring the Israeli state into despotism. Joining me to discuss his reporting and detention is the journalist Jeremy Loffredo. I want to look at several of your reports before we go into detail about your arrest and what happened, so people can get a look at the kind of reporting you did. You begin one of your earliest reports before you even go to Israel and the occupied territories is a story about Zionists at protests in New York City from last year. Just set that up for us and tell us what it is we're going to see.
Sure. So this was a few days after October 7th, and this wasn't a protest. This was a counter protest. A few days later, Israel was well into launching their attack into Gaza, and there was an anti-war rally, a pro-Palestine rally in New York City outside of the Israeli embassy, and there was these counter-protesters, these counter-Zionist protesters, pro-Israel protesters, cheering, in opposition to the pro-Palestine people, and I, instead of covering the Palestinian protesters, which I was very familiar with their language and what they were saying and what they were arguing, Free Palestine and the occupation. And then I thought it would be more interesting instead to speak to the other side. And I interviewed them and allowed them to be extremely candid with me. And I interviewed many of them that they called for genocide, they called for a second Nakba. You'll see it right here.
Fuck Palestine! Palestine to my dick!
What do you think the response should be from Netanyahu and the military to Gaza?
Kill all Palestinians! All of them! Not one left from the river to the sea. Palestine will be deceased!
And Israel need to do like this. You see? Now Gaza. Like this. Gaza need to do like this. Or like this, but all this Jewish. Two options.
What do you think the response should be to Gaza?
We gotta wipe them off the fucking map. I'm talking about every fucking flatten them like a parking lot.
Yeah,
wait. Flatten them out once and for
There's
all.
nothing else you can do. They proved to us that there's nothing else you can do. We tried, and
We tried everything. It doesn't work. We have to wipe them flat off the fucking map, like a fucking parking lot.
I'm not stopping till all Arabs are wiped out.
I think now it's the time that we need to erase Gaza. There is people inside, our people inside, that kidnap, and now we need to kill all of them and free Israel. All of their belief is killing Jewish and killing and murder our people.
Flatten it, flatten Gaza.
that will be the last war in Gaza.
This will be.
Yes, it should be.
So, Jeremy, how reflective were those statements to the kinds of statements you heard from Israelis once you got to Israel?
Well, when I interviewed those people, I had never been to Israel before. I interviewed them, and it was the first time I heard anyone be so candidly racist and genocidal. And I didn't know, truly, I didn't know the face of like fanatical Zionism. Like I didn't know that, people spoke like that. So I was surprised, and I was surprised that it wasn't just one person said something crazy. It was a group of 100 people all saying the same thing, all saying things like that. And obviously, this is everyone. When I went to Israel, a few weeks after that, everyone has war fever. There's flags everywhere that weren't there a few weeks before. Together we will win signs, bring them home signs. It's like, post 9/11 almost. Like it's very like the war propaganda is everywhere. And it was also reflective like in what people were saying. Like even, maybe I was at a pub talking to someone who went to a liberal arts school, likes to paint, everything you hear them say, they're left leaning. They, want free healthcare. They want, affordable housing. And then they speak about the Palestinian question. And then they the Arabs are smelly. We need to take over Gaza. And so even the people that I would expect to hear, more progressive language from sounded exactly like, the far-right fanatical Zionists that I interviewed, weeks before in New York City. So it was kind of a shock to me.
Yeah, we had the same thing during the war in Yugoslavia. We used to interview Serbs who were artists and well-educated, and we called it the Linda Blair effect, because as soon as they started talking about Muslims, their heads started to spin around and around and around, like, of course, fanatical Zionists. Let's talk about the West Bank. I was in the West Bank this summer. The genocidal tactics that are commonplace in Gaza are increasingly being used in the West Bank. And you have a very good report called On the Silent War in the West Bank. And perhaps you can, because we're not showing the whole clip, just explain what it is we're going to see.
Sure. So shortly after October 7th, no journalists are allowed in Gaza. And so I went to the West Bank. I wanted to, be with the Palestinians, after this war began, see what they were dealing with in the occupied West Bank, see what life was like. And after the war began, the hundreds of thousands of settlers in the West Bank who were illegally there, they were all turned in to military reservists, all of them, all of the the military-aged ones. So they were given...
We should be clear, Jeremy, that's over 700. There are 700,000 colonists in the West Bank. We're talking about a pretty large number.
Yeah, a giant number. They were all given, military uniforms. Some settlements were given Humvees. They were given guns, even though they already had guns. They were given guns. And they were kind of given carte blanche to do what they already wanted to do and were already doing, at a very, in a smaller, frequency. They wanted to cleanse the Palestinians of the West Bank. They wanted to, get rid of them. They wanted to get rid of villages and then put in paperwork and build more Jewish settlements, more apartment buildings. And so no one was there. No one's there post October 7th. The military, the police were not there to, kind of, break up the fighting or like stop the settlers from doing things that are illegal. I mean, their entire existence there is illegal, but from, being extra violent. So the military and the settlers were working together after October 7th to get rid of the Palestinians in the West Bank while all eyes were in Gaza.
Yeah, they created rogue militias. It's been the largest land seizure in the West Bank since the Israeli occupation, I think 30% of the Jordan Valley, if I have that right, and they have created reigns of terror by going into these Palestinian villages, and you're in one of these villages.
Yeah, of course.
The thousands of Palestinians from villages that have already been cleansed and displaced from their rural lands have had to find land away from settlers and pitch tents. Residents of this village were told by settlers accompanied by the Israeli military that if they did not vacate their land in 24 hours, they would all be killed. Entire bedrooms remain, children's toys, school books, food, dressers full of clothing. Before fleeing, the Palestinians spray-painted one of their shacks. "We will return one day," it says. The settlers have destroyed many of these structures in order to ensure that no one returns before they begin building a new, illegal Jewish development. This Palestinian, along with his children, lived in this village. They are now living on a small plot of land alongside other displaced residents. I spoke to him in a gas station parking lot because he was terrified of what settlers would do if they spotted him being interviewed by a foreign journalist.
طبعا احنا رحنا من بيوتنا نتيجة هجوم للمستوطنين، المستوطنين والجيش هجموا علينا في 12 أكتوبر الساعة 12 الظهر. فجأنا في هجوم منسق بين الجيش الإسرائيلي والمستوطنين اللي لابسين مدني واللي لابسين جيش برضو معهم سلاح. يمكن تحكي عن 30 سيارة، أكثر من 70 عنصر بين جيش مستوطنين، بين مستوطنين لابسين مدني، كلهم حاملين سلاح. اللي مش حامل سلاح حامل عصا، حامل سكين، حامل. هجموا علينا وبلشوا فينا ضرب، بطحونا على الأرض وخبطوا علينا بجريهم، أخذوا الهوية تبعاتنا وأخذوا منا التلفونات عشان ما نصور ولا نثبت أي شيء. تقريبا أكثر من نص ساعة وهم باطحيننا على الأرض ومكلبشين إيدينا، ربطوا إيدينا في سلوك البناء في البلاستيك، ربطوا إيدينا. بعد نص ساعة تعذيب وبطح وضرب وإطلاق نار وحكوا لنا معكم ساعة، لازم تأخذوا المواشي تبعاتكم والأولاد النسوان الموجودات وبتروحوا، ممنوع تأخذوا بيوت ولا إشي، ممنوع تأخذوا معكم. هيك بيحكي حتى نيريا بن باز اللي كان بيحكي والجيش، ممنوع تأخذ ولا شيء، بدك تروح. كمان ساعة اللي يكون هون بدي يموت، راح نطلق عليه النار. وفي إطلاق نار على الغنم وعلى الناس وخبط وضرب الناس خافت وطلعت. هي فترة حرب، كلهم لبسوا جيش وصاروا بس يجوا على البيت من يذبحوا ويضربوا ويقتلوا وسكروا علينا الطريق، بطل نقدر نيجي نروح نطلع نجيب أكل لأولادنا، أكل لمواشينا. يعني إحنا عملوا علينا حصار، تغير الوضع صار أسوأ، يعني الذبح صار أسهل. أنا بتمنى إني أرجع، بالعكس أنا عايش حياة صعبة جدا هذه الأيام. يعني أنا عايش بدون بيت، بدون ولا إشي. يعني هيك أنا عند الناس، لا حمام زي الناس، لا أكل زي الناس، لا شرب مي زي الناس. حتى المواشي تبعاتي لا في لهن إشي يغذيها على المطر، ولا في عندنا أكل زي الناس. أنا مش قادر أرجع لأني خايف على روحي، خايف على حياتي، لا أرجع من المستوطنين، خايف على أولادي، خايف على الناس.
Another West Bank Palestinian who's been forcefully displaced from his village is Mohammed. He now lives with his entire extended family in a tent on someone else's property.
تخيل لو اني في الرشاش، انا متت من الاكل، ماتوا الغنم تبعي ما قدرت اجيب لهم اكل للغنم، فانا كمان متت من قلة المي الاكل. هم في غزة قطعوا عنهم المي والاكل والكهرباء، انا هون في الرشاش بدهم قطعوا عني المي والكهرباء. طب انا ايش اسوي يعني؟ بالنسبه لي انا مش عايش في غزة، انا عايش هنا في الضفة وقطعوا عني المي والكهرباء. نحن لو عسيبنا شوم دفار متى اني فلسطيني برخي فلسطيني ما هم عسيم بي، هم يعني يهرقوا بلي سيبا تصير ما دموت، رسول قناوة كلها دموت، كل طريق كل فلسطين من اشياء تخسي. في حياة صعبة في غزة. هذا حشر لما انفجر انفجار زي قبة زي الانفجار النووي. والمستوطنين هنيا في الضفة بيضغطوا على الفلسطينية زي ما ضغطوا إسرائيل تضغط على غزة، ورايح الفلسطيني هنا بينفجر زي ما انفجرت غزة على المستوطنين. نظل الوضع زي كذا، ضغط ضغط ضغط. الشعب الفلسطيني هم اللي كلا هواء في حرب غزة هذه. هذول راحوا من إيش؟ من سياسة الحكومة الإرهابية، سياسة إرهابية، سياسة ضغط، تسكير على الناس. طب هاي في ناس عرب ومسلمين عايشين في أوروبا، يجوا من سوريا عايشين في أوروبا، سووا مشاكل زي ما يسووا. ليش ما يصير تعايش ويهود؟ ليش ما يصير زي أمريكا، هذه أمريكا ولا أوروبا؟ ليش ما يصير تعايش بين لك حقه وكلك حقه؟ لو في بتعايش بين المواطن بين المواطن ما بيصير زي كذا.
Let's talk about Palestinians who are arrested for their activism. You interview a woman who was detained in an Israeli prison, and then she's released as part of the November hostage exchange. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that report.
Sure. So this is now, I guess, 2 years ago. Her house was raided, just like her neighbors' houses have been dozens of times, just like her house has been dozens of times. And they made some vague accusations against her, as they do, all Palestinians living in the West Bank, saying that, you said something wrong, you talked to someone wrong, you posted something on social media that we didn't like. I don't know exactly what they told her. And they took her away and they put her in prison. And she was in prison under this administrative detention. And so she is not charged. She's a woman. She's not charged. She's in prison for however long the Israelis say. And she can be kept wherever the Israelis say. She's in a prison where her family doesn't know where she is. She has no rights. And this is a woman, probably the age of my mother. And this is in outside of Bethlehem in a refugee camp. And after interviewing her, I will say she reached back out to me, explaining that they just came and took her neighbor. This is just like that they took her. So this is not happening to one person. I didn't find the one person who this has happened to. This happens to all Palestinians. They get put in administrative detention for things for political speech, and this is just one of the women.
تم اعتقالي ب4 أبريل السنة الماضية الساعة 6:10 الصبح. طبعا سبب الاعتقال هو لدواعي أمنية بتحكيها أو هي الحجة دائما إنه خطير على الأمن الإسرائيلي.
While over 100 Israelis are being held captive in Gaza, Israel is holding over 10,000 Palestinians in its own jails. More than 3,000 of these Palestinians were arrested and detained without charge, trial, or the ability to appeal. The State of Israel calls this type of procedure administrative detention. It's reserved for Palestinians who engage in any type of political activity or speech against Israeli occupation and their family members. What it amounts to is official kidnapping. Rawda Abu Ajamia is a 47-year-old Palestinian woman who's lived her entire life in the Detention refugee camp outside Bethlehem in the West Bank. She was taken from her home by military police last year and kept in one of the Israeli prisons. In November, Hamas used 50 Israelis they took prisoner on October 7th as political leverage to free 150 Palestinians from Israeli jails. Rawda is one of the Palestinian prisoners who was released. She served 7 months in Ofer prison and Damon prison. I traveled through dozens of military checkpoints in order to sit down with Rawda in her living room as she recounted her arrest, Israeli prison, and coming home.
هو داهموا مجموعة منازل بتخصنا اللي هي هان دار أختي. أنا كنت نايمة هون، كان رمضان، وداهموا داري بالحارة الوسطى ودور إخوتي. طبعا أغلب الأبواب فجروهن تفجير. بالدار عندي غاد وهان. بعد تقريبا أقل من 10 دقائق كانوا ماخذين ابن أختي. انحرك لأنه قنبلة صوت عشان ما يغلطوا كان الجنود معي. ما كان معهم مجندة اللي مفروض يعني تحط الكلبشات أو عصبة العين. فعند الدبابة تقريبا تحت عند الأهلية جندي اللي كلبشني وحط العصبة عيني، وطلعنا على عصيون، ومن عصيون لمقر ثاني اسمه بانوراما أول مرة بسمع فيه، وبعدها أخذوني لعوفر. ضليت تقريبا ويوم الأحد 9/4 ثبتوا 4 أشهر إداري.
Without any hearing, without any trial, and no ability to appeal, Rawda was sent to prison. They also arrested her teenage nephew.
Let's move on to the Israeli settlers.
Can I just say one thing about that video real quick?
Yeah.
How I found that woman. We had a list given to us by Adamir, which is like a prisoner rights NGO in Ramallah. And it was a list of 50 people who were recently released from administrative detention. And out of the 50 people, only one, that woman, she's so courageous, only one was willing to speak to us. Everyone was so afraid that if they spoke to a journalist, they would get thrown right back in prison. So that's how arbitrary, that's how, strict, that's how scared these people are. Out of 50 people, almost everyone is too scared to just speak about their experience to a journalist, except her.
Well, and they're told when they're released not to speak out.
Yeah, truly. It makes it even more brave.
So you go down to one of the crossings, and it's a great report. And you spend time with the Israeli settlers. I think you're there for a week, who are with the collaboration of the army, of course, and the police, blocking the aid trucks coming from Egypt into Gaza. So talk about this first, and then we'll watch the clip from that report.
Sure. So I was there. I was in Jerusalem at the time, and I knew this was happening, and I didn't really know how exactly to, ingratiate myself or, kind of embed myself with these people. I at first drove down to these aid blocks, these direct action aid blocks, with a fellow journalist, like an anti-Zionist, like leftist journalist inside of Israel, and we walked around. I was interviewing people, and I noticed that this person was almost was getting a little too emotional. This person was kind of arguing with the settlers, and you're not going to change these people's minds. They're arguing about how many women and children in Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. And they were looking at me as if to say, we're not going to speak to these people. So I changed my strategy, and I began taking a bus that left from Jerusalem with them through the occupied West Bank. It would stop at settlements, pick up, fathers and young children and mothers, and go through the West Bank all the way down south to the Karim Shalom or the Nitzana border crossings. And they would take these buses through the West Bank, pick up the protesters, and bring them to the crossing. And once they would get to the crossing, this is a closed military zone. So, no one is allowed here. It's supposed to be allowed here. But as soon as these settlers show up, the military uses their presence as justification to shut down the aid crossing. So the military knows, the state of Israel knows, that if they actually shut down the aid crossing, there will be, international political outcry. So the settlers do it instead, and they use the settlers to justify shutting down, aid to Gaza. So they work hand in hand. The settlers, kind of rid the Israeli government of actual, political responsibility for not allowing aid into Gaza. And they were, sharing sandwiches. The army, and listen, they're not supposed to. It's illegal that they're there. But the military is giving them sandwiches, watermelon, ice pops. They're palling around. They're hanging out. And day after day, as soon as the settlers show up, and I'm with them, the blocking gets closed. No aid gets into Gaza day after day after day. And they consider that a giant success. And after I filed this report, I was told, these are fanatics. This isn't really the government line. These people are fringe, even though the military is working with them. You could see that it's, it's the government line. But now you have, people in the Knesset, people in the Likud party, arguing that they should stop aid, that they shouldn't send aid, something that just a few months ago we were told is fringe, and no one was saying that. So it very quickly became, reality. And so that's a good intro. We could watch the video.
The police man, the head commander, came to us and said, okay, you guys came in blocked, we don't want to fight. And he said to us, I'll just lock the gate, you guys don't need to stand in the sun. We got lollipops, we got watermelon from the police.
Lollipops and watermelon.
Yeah, watermelons, and was great with them.
So no food, no nothing.
No, they don't deserve it. What I care? Kill them, I don't care.
Do you trust Palestinians?
No, I know all about them. I don't trust them. I want them out of here.
What do you think should happen to Gaza?
I want to be civilized with Jews from Israel.
My unit was in charge of explosions. We blew up houses of terrorists, mosque, UN offices. I remember we got into some UN office that was in charge of helping families in Gaza that was affected by the war, and we destroyed it.
We give pastries for the people, for the soldiers, for the cops, for everybody. This is what we give to our people. This is real humanitarian, okay? They need to block the aid to Gaza. They need to block the gas to Gaza. Everything to block, and this is what we do every week, 2, 3, 4 times a week.
And as the Bible says, this place is for us, it's promised for us, so they can starve to death to pay on the things that they've done to us on the 7th of October.
אני חושב שצריך, לא יודע, אני חושב שצריך כולם להיות מאוחדים ואנחנו צריכים, אנחנו נכנסים, צריך להיכנס חזרה לעזה ולהשתלט שם על המדינה, להשתלט שתהיה מדינה שלנו.
Bibi is a puppet of Biden, because we cleaned all Gaza, except in Rafiah. Why aren't we going in there? Because Biden asked us not to. That's the only reason. There's no reason not to.
That last segment, Jeremy, we actually see settlers walking on towards Gaza.
Yeah, they went into Gaza. These are the same people that were blocking the aid. Sometimes they would go to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, the Erez crossing, and they would have a caravan of people, and they would get to as close as they could to the Erez border crossing, and they would bring vinyl and plywood and drills and hammers, and the military would allow them into Gaza. Again, this is a closed military zone. There's not supposed to be any civilians here, let alone civilians crossing into Gaza. And they were building what they called symbolic outposts. And these are little sheds or houses that they would build on the Gaza side of the Erez border crossing, in a way to tell the government, like, we are ready to move to Gaza when you tell us that we're allowed to. And a lot of them are from Gush Katif, the last settlement that was in Gaza before the disengagement. And they're, calling for the resettlement and the Judaization of Gaza. And they say, settlements equal security. So if they believe if they were to settle in Gaza, then the military would have to protect them. and that means the military would be permanently occupying Gaza, and a permanent occupation of Gaza would lead to, no more October 7th, as they would argue.
If you speak out, even if you're Israeli, of course, against the genocide in Gaza, you are targeted. And you have a report speaking to Israelis protesting the war. We're going to see just 3 clips from it. I'll let you set it up. One is from a Yom Kippur veteran. One is from a high school teacher, Meir Barukin, and the other is from the principal of a school, Yael Aylan. Just explain that report, and then we'll watch those clips.
Sure. So shortly after October 7th, there is a high school teacher named Meir Barukin, and he would post things on Facebook that would, to the effect of, Muhammad was 13 years old. Muhammad wanted to be a professional soccer player, but Muhammad will never be a professional soccer player because he was killed by our wonderful, men and women in the Gaza Strip. And so, he was trying to humanize children in Gaza through these Facebook posts. And his house was raided, his computers and his cell phones were seized, and he was put in solitary confinement for 8 or 9 days. And he was, they tried to charge him with incitement, which carries, 25 years to 50 years in prison. And he eventually, he was let out of prison. But I was there when he was originally getting arrested. And at the courthouse, there was maybe a 10 or 15 person, older Israeli Jews there, showing their support for this Meir Barukin. And they were brutally beaten by a special police force inside of Jerusalem. And so the first interview that we're going to see right now is one of the older men who was there voicing his support for Meir Barukin, who was getting charged with incitement for simple Facebook posts, and he was beaten by the police.
To say it in one sentence, they came in order to beat us. I didn't see such cruelty, such violence from the side of Jerusalem police in terms of, chasing, eating, not hesitating to beat adults, I would say even old ladies. And people were cursed. I mean, the policemen didn't hesitate to curse people in sentences like, go to Gaza, go to East Jerusalem, go to Sheikh Jarrah, we don't want you, you are lousy leftists. This kind of stuff, they didn't hesitate as people of the law to curse citizens, and we did nothing. For me, it was a fascist event, really. Coming and doing these horrible things to the people who respect the law, who did nothing. I was attacked in Jerusalem, and my son Nadav serves in the army very near the northern border. I mean, to treat me as a Yom Kippur War veteran and the First Lebanese War veteran as a traitor, as a person whom you have to attack, whom you have to curse or mock, is impossible. By shouting or saying different things that are not, in the national consensus, you reveal yourself as a traitor.
And we should be clear that older man that you interviewed, he is a veteran from the Yom Kippur War, and his son is in the military.
Yeah, he used to be. I mean, he's not like an anti-Zionist by any means. He lives in Israel. He's Jewish. He served in the army. His son is in the army. He just didn't believe that this high school teacher, Meir Barukin, should be in prison for 50 years for trying to humanize Gazan children on his Facebook, and that's the level where they're at in terms of repressing freedom of speech inside of Israel against, Israeli Jews, not even Palestinians.
So this last clip we're going to look at is probably the one that got you in, really serious trouble. And this is your reporting on the Iranian airstrikes in Israel. Although I want to, before we talk about it, be clear that you weren't the only one who showed footage from strikes. They came very close to hitting the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, but you weren't the only one who did it. But of course they went after you, and I think, having shown clips from all of these reports, we can understand why. So talk about this last report, and then after that we're going to talk about what happened to you.
Sure. So my original plan was to go to the northern West Bank on this most recent trip to spend time in the refugee camps in Jenin, around Nablus, Tulkarm, where there's been, regular raids and sieges, and, they shut off the water. There's, it's one of the few places, in the West Bank where there is, there's resistance. And so these people don't want them entering the refugee camp. The Palestinians don't want the military to come in. And so I wanted to go there and document the destruction caused by these raids and speak to people who have to deal with these raids. And, for the first time in a long time, there's been, a handful of airstrikes in the northern West Bank. People are saying, it's another front opening up in this war. So that was my plan. But the day I got to Israel, we had, it was October 1st, and that was the day of the Iranian ballistic missile retaliatory attack. And I spoke to, my editor and friend, Max Blumenthal. He said, you are there. Maybe you should file a report about this missile strike. I thought, I don't really know what to say about it. Everyone's talking about it. How about if I just try to find where the missiles landed? Maybe that's just, that could be the report. I do that. I go to the Nevatim Air Base in the south. I don't really see much. I go to the Mossad headquarters around there. There's a filled-in crater. I document it. I look at the news, and because I'm only one person, I'm not a news crew. My turnaround was a few days. So my report came out after the mainstream media, PBS NewsHour, Ynet, mainstream Israeli media and American media situated inside of Israel published very similar information that I did. And only I was, acted on and arrested. So we could watch a part of that video and talk about it.
Great.
I'm Jeremy Loffredo for the Gray Zone in Israel, where last night Iran fired over 200 ballistic missiles in retaliation for the assassinations of Lebanese and Iranian political and military leadership. Since the missile strikes, Israeli authorities have attempted to downplay the significance of the attacks, censor the locations of missile impacts from media publication, and claim that Iran was targeting Israeli civilians. What I saw today, here in Israel, is clear evidence that Iran was targeting the same Israeli intelligence and military infrastructure that's been used over the past year to carry out brutal assassinations and attacks. The military took away most of the missile, but there was still a piece left. The missile fell a quarter-mile west of Nevatim Air Base and about a quarter-mile from the Bedouin village, which is unrecognized by Israel, so it isn't supplied with any type of state-of-the-art bomb shelters like Jewish communities.
Where were people in the communities around here hiding yesterday during the sounds?
الناس كانت تشرد للمدارس وين ما في ملاجئ أو لوين ما في جسر كانوا يلبدوا تحت الجسر. أكيد لا، لأن ما في ملاجئ وما في أماكن آمنة للناس.
كان يجي يتخبوا في الوقت هذا. Many people sheltered here last night with the sounds of the rockets. They came and hide here.
Using visual clues from footage circulating online, I set out to locate where the missile may have landed. Driving down a street I believe to be in one of the missile videos, I saw a heavily damaged SUV, its windshield shattered, debris and concrete caked into the vehicle. Further down, the scene unfolded. Destroyed vehicles, torn up asphalt, and a massive crater, roughly 30 feet wide, recently filled in with dirt.
That's the Mossad headquarters.
The missile had hit less than 1,000 feet from Mossad headquarters. This information is missing from all Israeli media reports due to the fact it's been officially censored. Right here are the censored coordinates. Given the proximity to what is considered one of the world's most advanced intelligence agencies, it seemed clear that Israel was taking extra precautions to conceal the exact impact location. As we left the area, an unsettling incident occurred. Our cell phones lost GPS functionality, maps went blank, and then both devices, mine and my taxi driver's, suddenly showed we were at Amman's airport in Jordan, over 120 miles west.
So, now, explain what happened. I think you were at a checkpoint. Were you in Kalandia in Ramallah? But explain what happened.
I was finally, it was the first day where I finally was getting to do what I went there to do, which was reporting the northern West Bank. I was at a checkpoint maybe 15 minutes outside of Nablus, and the military asked everyone in the car with me, there was 5 of us, to hand over our passports, which isn't super strange, asking for ID at a checkpoint, hundreds of checkpoints in the West Bank. I wasn't nervous at all. I give the passport to him, and then they came back and they asked for us all to hand over our cell phones. And my phone was locked, and I knew all the information on my phone. Maybe I was, communicating with people who were in the northern West Bank, who maybe knew people, who would be considered by them as resistance fighters, as the military as terrorists. But it's, valid journalistic inquiry for me to, be communicating with these people for interviews. So yeah, I handed over my cell phone. Everyone did except one journalist. He refused to, and he had a gun pointed at his face. He was dragged out of the car. He was punched a few times, and then they took his phone as well, and then told all of us to get out of the car and stand on the street, sit on the street beside the military checkpoint. And then maybe after an hour of us sitting on the dirt, one of the army officers pointed at me and said, "Mr. Loffredo, will you come here?" And so I crossed the street towards the checkpoint, and I said, "What's happening?" And they said, "You're being arrested." And they pulled out maybe 20 or 30 feet of blindfold cloth, and they wrapped it tightly around my head, maybe 10 or 15 times, around my ears, my eyes, and part of my nose. They shackled my legs, and they zip tied my hands. And then I was put in a military Humvee and kind of arbitrarily driven around. And then it stopped. I was then transferred into a police car, or what seemed to be a police car. I was blindfolded still. And then the police car drove about an hour south towards Jerusalem. It took me to the biggest police headquarters in the West Bank, and I was put in a holding cell. My blindfold was finally taken off my head. I was in the holding cell, and they actually they arrested all of us who were in the car. So we were all here at this kind of West Bank military compound. The other journalists that I was with were allowed to go home, and that's kind of when I thought to myself, maybe this is something more serious for me, because everyone's allowed to go home except me. And I heard them playing this report, my voice. I heard my own voice when I was sitting in my holding cell. I heard them listening to my report, so I knew it was something. Not that I was at a checkpoint, not that I was with maybe some people that I was with have Israeli citizenship and they're not allowed into Nablus. But it was not about any of that. It was about my video report. Before I was able to speak to a lawyer or anything like that, they called me out of my cell and they told me to stand in front of a big flag that said, "Together we will win," which is like the nationalist wartime slogan for the war. And it wasn't they didn't take like official photos. They all took out their phones. They were yelling at me in Hebrew. They were just snapping photos for like maybe they have a group chat or something, just kind of taunting me. telling me to stand here, telling me to smile, telling me to stop smiling. And then they would send me back to my holding cell. They were really just trying to, confuse me and scare me. And then finally, after a few hours in the holding cell, they said, your lawyer's on the phone. I said, I don't know why I even need a lawyer. Like, what? I still don't really know what's happening. I answer the phone, and the lawyer says, Mr. Loffredo, I want you to think very hard. What have you done? You're being charged with giving information to the enemy during wartime. It's a very grave offense. And can you think of anything? I said, I filed a report, and I'm trying to speak to this woman, and she barely speaks any English. And I have like 45 seconds to speak to my lawyer. So she doesn't really understand what I'm saying. I don't really understand what she's saying. The phone call ends. She says, listen, they're going to interrogate you. You're going to be brought to a prison, and I'll see you in court tomorrow. And so that was the first day, and that's how I originally got arrested.
And then what happened?
First, I was interrogated. They asked me if I was familiar with Israel's military censor. I said yes, and they said, then why did you publish your video, et cetera, et cetera. I said, I published my video. I'm familiar with your censor, of course, but because your entire mainstream media was publishing information similar to mine, I didn't know I was breaking any censorship laws. They asked me if I have any, connections or friends or family in foreign militaries. I said no. They asked me why I included the coordinates in the video. I said because, as a journalist, giving as much information in context is important, and many journalists would say the same thing. And this entire interrogation, it was in Hebrew. There was only it was only translated from a person on a cell phone who spoke Russian, very little English. So I'm trying to tell this person on the cell phone why I think what I did is right and why I'm innocent. And she doesn't really understand me and is trying to tell the Hebrew guy who also doesn't understand me. Like, we are all upset. I'm getting frustrated and I'm scared. The intelligence officer doesn't understand what I'm saying and is upset with the person on the phone who's supposed to be translating. So it's a horrible way to hold an interrogation, to communicate with someone. And then I'm put in an unmarked, police vehicle, and I'm taken to the Russian compound in Jerusalem, which is about a 15-minute drive west. And so I get to the military. I get to the Russian compound. They open a solitary confinement cell. It's about 10 feet by 8 feet. There's a concrete slab with a bed or blanket, depending on how you want to use it. It's so thin, it could be used as both. And I get put in there. They slam the door shut. I don't know at that point what time my court hearing is the next day. I'm just kind of in solitary confinement now. And, 8 hours before, I was in a car driving to meet someone in Nablus and do my job. And now I'm being charged with, as an enemy of the state. And so I had my first night in prison, and then the next morning, and keep in mind, at this point, they did not give me any water or any food. I had my court appearance, and the intelligence, the prosecutors, they wanted to keep me in solitary confinement for 7 days. And the judge said, why 7 days? And they said, because he's dangerous. And they said, why do you think he's dangerous? And they said, it's top secret. And this is all being translated to me. Entire court hearing is in Hebrew. I don't understand what's happening. And the judge doesn't believe them really when they say it's top secret, thankfully. And she says, you can have him for 1 day. You can interrogate him for 1 day. You can interrogate him. You can go through his cell phone. You can go through his computer. You have 1 day to continue on this with these charges. And so they bring me back to solitary confinement. They don't feed me that night either. And they also don't interrogate me. The police don't interrogate me, even though the judge told them that they were allowed to. And so the next day in court, a Ynet journalist came and testified on my behalf and said, I'm a journalist for Ynet. I have a GPO card. I have a government press office card. I am, mandated to go through the military censor whenever I publish something. And I published something very similar to Mr. Loffredo. And not only that, I published information relating to why Jeremy Loffredo was detained. And the military censor allowed me to explain what was in his video and even allowed me to embed his video in my article. And they said there's nothing secret in it. And so he showed his conversation with the military censor to the judge. The judge read all of it and said, okay, if Mr. Loffredo can publish this, if the UNET journalist can publish this, why can't Mr. Loffredo? And the police said, well, it's because Mr. Loffredo doesn't like Israel. And so that's like, it's not even an opinion. It's like, this was very political, and this had very little to do with that actual video. This had much more to do with my prior reporting and maybe with the Gray Zone publishes and what I've published in the past in Israel and in the West Bank. But thankfully, that is the opinion, and that is the view, and that is how the police and the military conduct themselves. But this judge didn't really accept that and said he needs to be let out of detention. I was brought out of the prison. I was brought out of the court, brought back to prison. I was signing the paperwork to leave prison. And a few guards said something in Hebrew to me, and they grabbed me. They pulled me away from the paper. They took the pen out of my hands, and they threw me back in solitary confinement. I did not know what was happening. They didn't tell me anything. And a few hours later, this is probably 8 p.m. Intelligence officers, plainclothes, come to my cell and take me out. They shackle me, they handcuff me, they load me into a car, and they take me back into the West Bank. And I'm frightened. I'm wondering if I'm going to get tortured now. I really don't know what's happening. The people driving the car aren't really telling me anything, the police officers. And I just asked them, what's happening? And they said interrogation. I said, but I was just about to leave, like prison. What happened? And the court allowed the police to appeal the court's decision hours after the window for appealing the decision had closed already. They were allowed to retroactively appeal it and throw me back in prison and take me to the West Bank. And so I was interrogated, at night in the West Bank at this military compound. And they asked me, now I know they have my phone. So I'm wondering, are they going to ask me now about what's on my cell phone? If you have someone's cell phone, you're kind of in their brain. These are now different questions than just why or why not is your video legal or illegal. But thankfully, all the questions still pertained to my video. And then they brought me back to the prison. And so at that point, I was kind of getting I was thinking a little more positively about the situation, that they really don't have anything. They're trying to charge me as an enemy of the state, as a spy. But they just keep going back to this video, and I keep answering why I think this video is legal. Other people were reporting on it. And I'm saying it very confidently. And they say, if everyone committed murder, does that mean you could commit murder? Making the analogy that everybody had reported on it, that means can I report on it? They know very well that everyone else is reporting on it. So they're making it clear in court transcripts to my face in secret. They know that I already reported on it. I get brought back to prison. Still have not gotten any food or water. I spend the night. In that morning, they finally give me a cup of chocolate pudding, and someone comes to my cell. And they introduce themselves as a social worker doing a wellness check on me. Sent to my cell because the American embassy told the prison to send me a social worker. I said, this is great. Maybe I'll get more food. Maybe I'll get some water. Maybe I'm going to get some help. And she said, why did you hurt Israel? You hurt Israel. Do you love Israel? And I was, taken aback. I thought I was about to get some help. She's berating me for my reporting. She's berating me because I don't agree with her when it comes to, the occupation. And she tells me that I'm probably going to spend a long time in prison. And then she closes the steel window to my solitary confinement cell and she walks away. So just to clarify, that is the only help that the American embassy afforded me was giving me this, Zionist social worker to berate me because of my reporting and give me no help at all. But that's beside the point. I went to court a few hours later, and finally, I was allowed out, and I had to spend the next 10 days in the country without my passport, my phone, or my laptop, and allow the authorities to continue interrogating me.
And while you were in the prison, I believe you heard screams or cries from Palestinians. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was in solitary confinement, but maybe there was 100, 150 other prisoners in there, all Palestinian. I was the only white person from what I can tell. I didn't see any Israelis, but I can't see anything from my cell, but I can hear everything. And I heard, like really, really, harsh, like crying and yelling, only to be interrupted by, quick demands and questions in Hebrew from, I would assume, obviously, is a guard or a police officer, crying and yelling for maybe 4 hours straight. And like, I'm hearing this and I'm sitting in my cell, and it's, it's for lack of a better word, it's torturous just to hear that. And I can't, obviously I can't imagine what these people are going through. I mean, there's torture happening in this prison, and this is a prison that is notorious for, they bring Palestinians to this prison and they torture them in order to like manufacture false confessions. And this prison is also like notably criticized by human rights groups because it's not in the West Bank. It's not in Palestine. So they're bringing Palestinians from the West Bank into, Israel, and interrogating them there. So that's where they brought me. So that's where they bring an American journalist. They're not treating me as an American. They're not treating me as a journalist. They're treating me as an enemy of the state. And clearly for them, there's no difference.
And you're allowed to leave. Your lawyer calls it an informal deportation, and they've left your case open, which essentially means if you can't go back, because if your case is open, they can grab you again. Is that correct?
Yes, my lawyer called this, so I'll just back up and I'll tell you exactly what happened. So I was interrogated for probably a combined time of 15 hours during that 10 days. One interrogation was 6 hours long, and then other interrogations were, an hour or 2 hours, where they're just continuously asking me the same questions, different ways, trying to see if I'm lying or if I slip up on an answer, just like playing semantics. And one interesting question they asked me was, they said, you expect me to believe that you went to school for journalism. You went to school for journalism. You took all these classes. You had all these professors. But you never learned about the importance of a military censor. I said, I explained that we have the First Amendment, and that's not exactly how it works in America. And I would assume he understands this. And it was as if he was, learning about America from me. He couldn't wrap his head around, the military not censoring journalists. And of course that happens here. But, it's much more like, self-censorship. But that was one question they asked me. And, they're asking me about other reports that I've seen that I knew had happened in Israel that had the same information as me. So I had to tell them these reports. And I was kept in these interrogations for hours and hours and hours, without water, still shackled, still handcuffed. And then finally, after 10 days, the 20th of October came, and that was the day that the court said, I find out if I'm getting rearrested or if I get my passport, my phone, and my laptop back. And they called up my lawyer, and they said, can Mr. Loffredo book a sooner flight? Because my flight was for the 23rd, 2 days later. And she said, of course. So I went to my lawyer's office. I used their computers. I booked a flight. We sent them the flight information, and they went entirely incommunicado. They had not answered us since. So we booked the flight, and we thought, they told us to book a flight. Maybe we should try to get my passport, my phone, and my laptop back. So we gave one of my friends there in Jerusalem, power of attorney, sent him to the West Bank military compound, and they gave him all my stuff back, including my passport. And so that was like that was the moment where I found out that like I think I am able to leave. And I got on a plane and they interrogated me at the airport a couple times, but I did leave the country and they left my case open. Still, like I have a case open there right now. I spoke to my lawyer yesterday. Giving information to the enemy during wartime, it's open, but they allowed me to leave. And if I come back through Ben Gurion Airport, the most securitized airport probably in the world, and I will be immediately detained, my lawyer says, for the same charges that they were trying to get me on before. So I'm dissuading from going back until the case is closed. I don't know if I really ever want to go back.
Great, thank you. That was journalist Jeremy Loffredo. I want to thank Max, Diego, Sophia, and Thomas, who produced the show. You can find me at chrishedges.substack.com.